Your grandmother is talking. You are half listening, phone in hand, waiting for her to get to the point. You have heard this story before. You think something about a hard winter, a long time ago. It does not seem to matter now. Now imagine there is no phone in your hand, no screen to glance away to, no book on a shelf, no recording, nothing written down anywhere in the world. There is only her. Whatever she carries inside her head is the only copy that will ever exist. 12,000 years ago, in a valley thick with rain, a girl no older than 8 follows an old woman everywhere she goes. The old woman is her grandmother, and her hands are slower now than they once were, her back bent from decades of carrying, digging, walking. Every morning, the grandmother rises before the others and walks out into the wet grass to dig for roots buried deep in the soaked ground, roots the children's small hands cannot reach. And the young mothers have no hours left to find. She carries them back in a woven sling, and it is the girl who eats first. Researchers who lived among hunter-gatherer communities in East Africa observed something similar in modern times, grandmothers spending long hours each day digging deep tubers, feeding grandchildren directly, and in doing so freeing the children's mothers to rest, to nurse a newborn, to gather more. It is worth saying plainly, a mother freed this way can have her next child sooner, and the one after that sooner still. 2 years, saved again and again across a lifetime, becomes an entirely different rate of survival for a family line. The girl does not know any of this. She only knows that when her grandmother is out in the rain, there is food when she returns. And when her grandmother is gone, the hunger arrives a little sooner. The grandmother teaches the girl in small pieces, the way rain fills a bowl one drop at a time, which berries turn from safe to deadly after the first frost, where the ground stays soft enough to dig even in the driest months, which pool holds water long after the rest of the riverbed has cracked open. None of this is the knowledge that matters most, and the grandmother knows it. Any adult in the camp could learn these things given enough seasons. What makes her irreplaceable is not what she knows about an ordinary year, it is what she remembers about the rare one. Far to the south, on a dry plain in Kenya, a severe drought once emptied the land of water. Researchers who studied the elephant families living there noticed something they did not expect. Some family groups left the park entirely, walking to distant water none of the younger animals had ever visited. Other families stayed and waited, and many of their calves did not survive. The families that left were led by the oldest matriarchs, old enough to have lived through the last catastrophic drought decades before, when they themselves were young. They remembered where the water had been, the last time the rain failed this badly. The younger leaders were not weaker, and they were not careless. They simply had never needed to know. Now they did, and there was no one alive in their memory to tell them. The girl does not know about elephants or droughts in a country she will never see. She only knows that when she asks her grandmother why they dig here and not there, the old woman always has an answer. And the answer always comes from somewhere the girl has never been. That night the clouds part entirely, and the sky above the valley fills with more stars than the girl has ever tried to count. The whole band gathers close around the fire, children press together for warmth, and it is understood without anyone saying so that the grandmother is about to speak. She begins the way she always begins, not with once, but with a place. She tells them of a river that no longer exists in the shape she describes it, a river that swallowed the low fields the year floodwater came down from the mountains without warning. She was younger than the girl is now. She remembers her own grandmother pulling her uphill in the dark, remembers the sound the water made moving through the trees, remembers 3 days spent on high ground eating nothing before the water finally pulled back. It is easy to hear this as only a story, a frightening night long past with no bearing on tonight's fire. But hidden inside it is an instruction: which slope floods first, how many days the water takes to rise and how many to fall, which direction holds the nearest high ground. Along coastlines on the far side of the world, researchers have cataloged oral histories from dozens of separate communities describing a shoreline that once sat much further out than it does today. Places you could walk to that the sea has since swallowed. When those accounts were compared against the actual historical sea level record, they lined up with a shoreline last seen more than 7,000 years ago. Not one detail was invented. 250 generations had carried it forward, spoken correctly, without a single page ever written. The girl does not understand yet that her grandmother's story is the same kind of object, not a memory kept for its own sake, but a set of directions, disguised as something softer, so that a child would want to hear it again. Winter arrives early that year, and for the first time, the grandmother cannot keep pace with the others when the band moves camp. Her knees have swollen for years, quietly. The way rivers wear stone, not an injury, just decades adding up in the same places again and again. Someone raises the obvious question around the fire, carefully. Without cruelty, how far can they keep carrying her before the cost outweighs what she gives back? It is worth pausing on how strange her survival already is. Biologically, almost every female animal on Earth keeps producing offspring until the body simply stops working. Human women, and only a small handful of other species, killer whales among them, live on for decades after that capacity ends. Evolution does not usually keep a body running for free. If it kept paying the cost of her decades past her ability to have more children, something about those decades must have been worth more than another birth. Archaeologists have found proof that this calculation was made and answered before, in bones far older than this fire. A Neanderthal man in a cave in what is now Iraq lived for years with a crushed face, a withered arm, and a leg that made walking painful injuries that healed slowly over time, meaning someone fed and sheltered him long after he could do either for himself. In France, another elderly Neanderthal had lost nearly all of his teeth long before he died, his jaw reabsorbed where they had been. He could not have chewed raw meat. Someone softened his food for years. The band does not know these stories. They only know the woman by their fire and what she has already given them, and so the answer arrives the way it usually does, not as a vote, but as someone quietly handing her a share of the meat before anyone finishes asking the question out loud. The cold that takes her is not dramatic. It arrives the way most things in her life have arrived, slowly, then all at once. She stops rising before dawn to dig. Then she stops rising at all except to sit near the fire. The girl notices before anyone says it aloud, her grandmother has begun sleeping through the parts of the day she used to own on the last night. The wind outside does not howl the way it does in the stories the grandmother tells. It is almost gentle, almost forgettable, the kind of night nobody would remember if nothing else happened in it. The girl is allowed to sit close, closer than usual, and no one tells her to go to sleep. Her grandmother's hand finds hers without looking for it, the way it has found bread and berries and rivers 1,000 times before. She says something the girl does not fully understand yet, about the ridge behind camp, about the spring 2 valleys past it, about a year so dry the elders of her own childhood thought the world itself might end. The girl nods because nodding is what you do when someone you love is speaking and you want them to keep going a little longer. By morning, the fire has burned down to nothing anyone tends. The band moves quietly around the grandmother's still body with the particular carefulness of people who have done this before and will do it again. The girl sits where she sat the night before, in the same place by the same cold ash, and understands for the first time that a person can be a place you can no longer visit. 10 winters pass. The girl who followed her grandmother everywhere is now a young woman, tall enough to reach the high branches her grandmother once needed a stick for. She digs where her grandmother dug, in the wet months, and she is good at it, good enough that the younger children now follow her the way she once followed someone else. But there are gaps, and she has learned to feel their shape without being able to fill them. A plant she half remembers a warning about, a bend in the river whose name she never learned properly, a story that ended before she understood why it mattered. This is not carelessness, it is arithmetic. Researchers who study fossil teeth worn down over a lifetime, the way tread wears from a hoofprint, have measured, across hundreds of thousands of years, exactly how rare a person like her grandmother once was. For most of human history, almost no one survived long enough to become old. Then, in a shift the tooth record shows clearly, roughly 30,000 years ago. That changed, and in groups where it changed, the number of people surviving into old age multiplied. It is not a coincidence that the same window in time produced carved ivory, sewn clothing, and beads traded across enormous distances. A tribe that keeps its elders keeps its teachers, and a tribe with teachers stops starting over from nothing in every generation. There is a colder version of this same lesson, recorded much more recently. In the 1820s, a sickness moved through a small community of Inuit living far in the north, and it killed the oldest among them first. Within a single generation, the survivors had forgotten how to build the boat their coastline required to survive. Not the idea of a boat, the boat itself, the frame, the seams, the balance. It took another 40 years and contact with a different group entirely before that knowledge returned. The young woman does not know that story either. She only knows the shape of what is missing when she reaches for it, the way a tongue keeps finding the space where a tooth used to be. The dry season that year does not end when it should. The grass that should be green by now stays the color of old bone. By the second month, without proper rain, the young woman watches the band do the thing every band does when the ordinary knowledge runs out. They turn, without quite meaning to, toward whoever is oldest. There is no one left who remembers a drought like this. The oldest among them now is barely older than she is. She finds herself standing at the edge of camp, facing the same ridge her grandmother once pointed toward on the last gentle night of her life, straining to finish a sentence she was too young at the time to fully hold on to. A spring. 2 valleys past the ridge. A year so dry the elders of her grandmother's own childhood thought the world itself might end. She does not have the whole memory. She has the shape of it, the direction of the hand, the particular calm in the voice, the certainty that this exact kind of year had been survived before, by someone, using information that existed nowhere now except in the gaps of what she half remembers. Among peoples who still live this way today, this is not where the story would end. Anthropologists studying groups such as the Juth Hoansi of the Kalahari have documented an exchange system stretching across enormous distances, formal partnerships built over decades, sometimes across an entire lifetime, that grant a person rights to cross another band's land, to drink from their water, to ask for shelter when their own territory fails. Her grandmother had such partners, made across 40 years of visits, marriages, and small kindnesses this young woman was never told about directly because she never needed to be. Until now. She does not remember the spring's exact location, but she remembers a name of family, 2 valleys past the ridge that her grandmother once fed, once sheltered, once tied to this band through obligations neither side ever wrote down. She gathers 3 others and walks toward the ridge, carrying not a map, but a half-finished sentence, and the name of people who, she hopes, still remember owing something to a woman who is no longer here to collect it. The family beyond the ridge remembers. Not everything the exact spring takes another day of searching, guided by an old man's half-recollection of his own mother's stories, but they remember enough. They remember that a debt exists. They remember a name. And a name, it turns out, is sometimes the only key a lock actually needs. The band survives the drought not because one woman's memory was perfectly preserved, but because it was distributed before she died, scattered across a story, a direction, a name, and a network of obligations built one small kindness at a time across a lifetime, none of them fully witnessed. No single person held everything. That was never how it worked. It was never supposed to be one mind carrying the whole weight alone. The young woman understands this now, standing at the spring her grandmother never showed her directly, only pointed toward, only trusted her to eventually find. Your grandmother is talking. Perhaps you are not fully listening, perhaps, like the girl in this story. You cannot yet know which piece of what she is telling you will be the one you need decades from now, standing at some edge of your own. She is not just telling you what happened. She is quietly, without ceremony, handing you the only copy that will ever exist. Somewhere in your family, right now, someone is the last person who remembers something. A place. A reason. A name that means nothing to you yet. Listen a little longer than you planned to.